Ocean Parkway connects Prospect Park to Coney Island, and you have to understand that in those days there was no connection originally, so this became a scenic route. You can see that both sides of the street were planted. They did trees and flowers and what have you, and it was a big deal to have an outing to Coney Island, particularly on the weekend. Um, Here's Culver Depot. Uh, the railroads in those days were privately owned. So Culver was one of the owners of one of the railroads. There were 6 different lines that went to Coney Island. That's how popular it became. Eventually, by the way, they all became part of the New York City subway system. The Grand Hotels, you have to understand Coney Island was quite the destination. Notables, Washington Irving, Herman Melville, P.T. Barnum, Jenny Lind, the famous opera singer, Daniel Webster, Sam Houston, etc., all visited Coney Island at a certain point. Even Freud visited Coney Island. So it was quite the place to see. This is Manhattan Beach at the eastern end of the island. You can see the grand hotels were enormous. They often had plazas where there was live entertainment, bands, and what have you. Here's a bandstand where you can see it's viewable from the porch on the hotel. Oh, and here's the boardwalk. And by the way, everyone got dressed up in their finest to be seen in Coney Island. Here you go, Brighton Beach Hotel. Another view. Here's the flowers, plantings, etc. This is fascinating. There was a flood. They took 8 steam locomotives, jacked up the entire hotel, built track underneath it, and moved it back 800 feet from the water to avoid being flooded. What they said was the hotel, you can see all the windows. It had a lot of glass windows, and it was lit by kerosene lamps, which were also glass. And they claimed they moved the entire structure 800 feet, and not a single piece of glass was broken. I doubt you'll ever see anything like that again, but it was quite fascinating what they did. Here's inside the hotel, the palm court, and indeed the palm courts in several hotels were notable, and they sort of emulated each other and tried to outdo each other. The Oriental Hotel, you can see everyone dressed up. Indeed, that's what you would do. This is the Concord Hotel. I'm going to go back and forth for a moment. And here's the Jefferson Hotel, and you can see that they're the same hotel redressed. So obviously a different owner bought it and dressed it up accordingly. So this is later. This is in the 20s. You can see the cars, and people would do excursions to Coney Island via automobiles at this point. The Elephant Hotel, there were 2 built. One still remains in New Jersey, and it's certainly worth seeing. I've visited it, photographed it, what have you. This one was a lot bigger than the one that's remaining in New Jersey. It didn't last all that long. It was destroyed by fire, but what makes it interesting is that in each of the legs, which you'll see in a moment, there was like a store, a cigar store. Here's the stairs going up. Here's the hotel rooms. Reputedly, dioramas were big. They had circular stairs going up, and then you could view through the elephant's eyes the the beach and what have you. And apparently, it's my understanding that the rooms were available by the hour. So Coney Island indeed had a dark side. Here's the Half Moon Hotel, named after Henry Hudson's ship, what you saw in the first slide. And apparently the hotel became a mob hangout in the 30s. And according to certain newspaper articles, people would exit the building via the windows if they weren't liked by the mob. So there you have it, part of Coney Island's colorful history. Beaches and baths. A lot of the beaches originally were kind of segregated one from the next and separated by bathhouses And these enormous bath houses would rent bathing suits. In those days, people didn't have their own or bring their own. They also had changing rooms and lockers. Also, they would be rented. So that's how they made the money. You can see the pier going out to where the ships would come in. Here's a viewing tower. The viewing towers are very popular. And you can see a roller coaster here as well as not only, and a Ferris wheel in the background. So the amusement area was building up. This would be about 1900. You can see how wildly popular it was. Remember, these suits were wool, and you were fully clothed. So when they got wet, they were pretty heavy. As such, you will notice there are posts coming out of the water with ropes that you could hang on to. Most people didn't swim, and of course, those suits got to be really heavy, and there was quite an undertow there to boot. On the eastern end of the island, you can see the luxury hotels. This is more of the western end where, you know, the people would hang out. This is a lovely postcard because clearly people are wearing corsets under their bathing suits, which had to be intensely uncomfortable. Dated 1902, this postcard. Um, Here you got a view of the beach, the boardwalk, and the various amusement locales. You're going to see in a moment a view of where the different amusement areas were, but they were on both sides of Surf Avenue, sorry. And so there was lots of different things to see as you strolled along. Here's a merry-go-round, what have you. I've got better views of that coming up. Here's Coney Island at night. Coney Island was also known as the City of Lights uh, because electricity in those days was quite something. It was not all that common, and so you'll see later on that being powered by electricity was a big deal. Having electric lights at night was a big deal. A lot of lights were gas lamps in those days. Coney Island was also called the City of Fire. And remember, a lot of the electricity was knob and tube. The wires were exposed, so it wouldn't take much to start a fire. Um, Here's the from the beach looking in towards the amusement area. You can see, of course, the Ferris wheel and various other the arcade along the boardwalk, which would have different, food and activities and games and what have you. This is George Cornelius Tilliou, started with Tilliou's baths. You'll notice how the beach was patrolled in the early days with shotgun, and also he would serve beer. So he started off rather modestly. This is in 1865, and his establishment grew to be one of the three largest amusement areas on Coney Island. You'll see that in a moment. Here's Washington Baths. As I say, the bathhouses populated the boardwalk. They were very popular, and of course, they made their money renting suits and lockers. Here we are at night. These woven straw baskets were pushed by people. They were on wheels, and then you could, as a couple, get a tour of the boardwalk at night or during the day, both. By the way, there is a museum in Coney Island which has one of these on display, and there's also some other. At the end, I'll show you the things that you can visit. Balmer's bathing and swimming baths. A lot of these baths, by the way, had interior pools where you could bathe, which was a little safer than the ocean with the undercurrent. So you had both the ability to bathe either in or out. Great view with the baths in the background. Surf Avenue and the boardwalk. So Surf Avenue is the main east-west drag running across Coney Island. Originally it was dirt, and then it became paved, or cobblestones originally, and then paved. And there were trolleys that went down Surf Avenue, and you could stop at the different locations. So here's your trolley tracks, which would connect with the depots, of which there were a number. Remember, those were private railroads in those days. Here's Dreamland. And you can see some of the different places you could visit along Surf Avenue. Surf Avenue later on becomes quite the gathering place. Here's Surf Avenue a little later in the 20s. Here's Luna Park on the left. Feltman's, the home of the hot dog, where the hot dog was born. And the hot dog originally was called the Coney Island Red Hot. And that's indeed where it emanated from before Nathan's Famous. And you can see different establishments along the way that you could visit. And at this point, it became very popular to visit Coney Island. So here's the Rocky Road. There were a number of virtual journeys that you could take along Surf Avenue, and it's my understanding that a lot of them were dioramas, and they would be glass slides where you'd slide one picture past another, and it would create an early form of animation, and you could see different activities. And if any of you have seen Magic Lantern shows, they're quite fascinating. And it's very intriguing the way they created moving pictures with still images that were projected with either kerosene or arc lamps at some point a little later on. Here's the chariot race. They reenacted a lot of pieces from history. So restaurants, the race, the Rocky Road to Dublin, you'll see all of this later on as well. So here we are a little later yet, and you can see that the streets are now populated with trolleys and buses and privately owned automobiles and what have you. On the right is Steeplechase here, and on the left you don't see it, but would be Luna Park, two of the three great parks that existed. This is an outing. This to me is phenomenal. There's this many automobiles coming to Coney Island on a weekend. To own an automobile in those days was a big deal. So to have this many all in the same place at the same time was probably extraordinary. You can see some of the carts, the rolling carts for people to see all the sights, the beach. You could rent umbrellas, you could rent chairs, you could rent bathing suits. Here's more baths, more saltwater taffy and food and what have you. This is the Bowery, and the Bowery reputedly there was lots of things that went on, everything from gambling to prostitution to you name it. And this was indeed the other end of Coney Island, not the end with the luxury hotels and all and the bands and the theater and all the rest of it. This was where everyone hung out, and this was an amusement area that, by the way, was not as we think of it now, like amusement parks are for kids. In those days, amusement parks were for adults. A very different environment indeed. So here's an aerial view of Coney Island. This would be Luna Park, and here you can see where it says Luna Park, and these are the towers. I've got better pictures of these, but it's extraordinary architecturally. You can see roller coaster, and this side would be Steeplechase. You'll see better pictures of that coming up to boot. So the great parks, there were many, and I'm going to show you each of them, do a little bit of a close-up of each, and you'll get to see what made each of them so special. So here's Henderson's Music Hall. There were a number of music halls, all of which had live entertainment. So for example, Jimmy Durante got his start in Coney Island playing the piano. Stoush's, Ward's Baths, these are some of the things that you saw coming up. Feltman's, by the way, had a carousel, hot dogs. You'll see a little bit of that too. You'll also notice this is pre-Disney. And Disney said he invented, which he didn't, the notion of, in effect, capturing the public, where he, more or less, you paid a gate fee and he owned you for the day. You couldn't go to any other places or activities or what have you. So what happened here was they each built their own pier, Steeplechase, Dreamland, etc. The steamers would come in from Manhattan, land at the pier. They would come in and you would be in Steeplechase Park, its own park, or you'd come to Dreamland Pier and go to Dreamland, its own pier. This is the Steel Pier, which which you saw in one of the earliest slides where folks came in from Manhattan. Some of the others are the baths. This is Luna Park up here, which I'm not sure is actually labeled, but these are the three big parks in those days. This is one of the earliest parks, the Sea Lion Park, owned by Captain and founded by Captain Boynton. Captain Boynton was obviously a captain, but he brought in sea lions and he trained them. So this was a very early show. But you can see in the background the Shoot the Chutes. You can see a roller coaster ride, and also here you see bleachers in a circle. This was where the circus would have performed. So this is the earliest version of an amusement park. Here's your gate where they would come in and pay the admission, spend the day and see the shows, ride the rides, etc., swim, what have you. Shoot the Chutes became, I think, the model for all the other parks, in that the Shoot the Chutes appeared in other parks, the live shows appeared in other parks, what have you. So here's a beautiful shot from ground level. Here's the Shoot the Chutes, which you'll see, of course, coming up later on, closer views. You'll get a sense of what that was. Basically, the boats got carted up to the top, rode down the chutes, and then landed in the lagoon in the water, and then were paddled to the side where people unloaded and they could try it again. Steeplechase, the funny place, owned by George C. Tillieu. You saw a shot of Tillieu's beer pavilion on the beach, but this expands and becomes an extraordinarily large amusement place. You'll notice that Steeplechase, the funny place, existed in two different eras. One was 1897 to 1907. Why is it then 1908 to 1964? Because there was a fire, it burned to the ground, and then he rebuilt it in 1908 completely differently. So here's the original Steeplechase Park, which of course was huge. And a lot of the activities were both outdoors and indoors. The later Steeplechase Park was a huge glassed-in pavilion so that they could indeed run the amusements year-round, rain or shine or snow or what have you. And so it became quite different after the fire. This is, I think, delightful, the fact that they borrowed architectural elements from Beaux-Arts, from different periods, and just brought them all together and created this incredible scenery. This is something you would climb up to the top, and you can see you'd spiral down on a slide. These were called Helter Skelter, and it created, when you got off the bottom, a lot of chaos and what have you, hence the expression Helter Skelter, and of course the Beatles song, and our good friend Charlie Manson adopted it to boot. So here's the entrance to Steeplechase. You can see how popular it is. And also you can barely make out there are horses up here. Steeplechase's claim to fame was the horse racing, the steeplechase. I'll show you a better example of that coming up in the photographs, but that's what separated it from all the other parks. Here's another view of the entrance with the horses. And you can see admission was 10 cents. Here, when you came into this open area. Oh, by the way, the Steeplechase funny face, which is here and what have you, was never copyrighted, and hence it's been used by many different places, and he had no right to it because he never trademarked it or copyrighted it or anything. Here's the horses. This is the main entrance. This is quite an extraordinary ride. This is a Ferris wheel on either end of a seesaw. It would come down, load up, and then it would rock back and forth. After the fire, all of the cars that were on either side that you would load into and ride burned, and he used it as a huge sign. So you'll see it in later pictures, but not as a ride, as a device to attract attention. In this early version, the steeplechase horses were down on the ground here. Later on, Tillieu realized it was the attraction, why people came to Steeplechase Park, and he raised it up in the air so that you could see it from Surf Avenue, including at that point there was a fence, but you could see it over because it was up high. This is the new steeplechase funny place. And you can see it's all glassed in, a huge pavilion. Everything happened in there. They also had some outdoor gardens, these rides, swings, Japanese gardens, restaurants, etc., all within the confines of Steeplechase Park. I will say it lived till 1964 when Donald Trump's father bought it and destroyed it to make way for apartment buildings that were not approved. So it was kind of sad because nothing replaced it. Here's observation cars on a Ferris wheel. This is the parachute jump. The parachute jump, you'd get hoisted up and then you'd float down. And I'll give you more on the history of the parachute jump coming up. But it was quite something. Here it is at night, all lit up. You can see the scale was quite extraordinary. And the side streets also often had entertainment. Here's Nedix, which you can just barely see. Here's the double Ferris wheel saying Steeplechase Park. This is the one I told you became the sign. Here's the steeplechase horses. This is a gravity ride. So between the legs are wheels that ride on these rails. And all of the horses were released at the same time from the top. And as you would go up and down the hills and around the curbs, one of the other horses would get further ahead than the other. And you would kind of race each other. So it was quite an extraordinary ride. Here's the observation cars on the Ferris wheel. Tell you about that in a moment. This is the interior of the pavilion. The interior of the pavilion was quite extraordinary and had activities, games, rides, food, you name it. And here we go. This is, I actually rode this. There's, I believe, a couple of these left. There's your bicycle. It's a bicycle merry-go-round. You get on the bicycle and you pedal. Everyone pedals and it goes in a circle. It's a lot of fun, to be honest with you. There were dancing pavilions, there was indoor swimming, all kinds of things. This gives you a sense of the scale. You could buy tickets. Here's the funny mirrors. So there was a lot going on, a lot to see. In fact, you're going to see later, there were viewing areas where you can just simply watch the public. This is the El Dorado, which was a famous carousel. It was a salon carousel. A salon carousel had a surround that surrounded the exterior of the carousel. And you can see these booths here where you could order food and beer and watch the carousel during the evening. So remember, in these days, carousels were considered an adult entertainment, but they were quite elaborate. You could see there was stained glass, there were carvings, it was very beautifully painted. And there was, rather suggestive sculptures everywhere. And the idea is you could cuddle in these benches and what have you, and it was not well lit. So that was part of the fun. Here's an exterior view of Steeplechase Park. You can see the scale. It's quite extraordinary. So they had 25,000 suits they rented, and they had the Pavilion of Fun, which you just saw the interior of, and from the Surf Avenue side. Here's another view. This is the glassed-in pavilion. These are the exterior rides. I love the fact that the post office is sandwiched in between all of this. This is the largest pool, and here's the double Ferris wheel without the cars on it. Here's a big Ferris wheel. George C. Tilliou apparently was quite the showman. So for example, in the World's Fair in Chicago, Ferris exhibited the first and the largest Ferris wheel. George C. Tilliou offered to buy it. Ferris refused. So George C. Tilliou built his own and advertised it as the world's largest Ferris wheel, which it was not. It was about a third less than the one at the Chicago Pavilion exhibition. This is lovely with the divers on either side, the rope ladder that you could climb up and dive off of. This is an indoor pool. So remember, they had both. The bathing beauties, clearly they had spectacles on the weekends that would drive attendance. So I love this dancing not allowed. No telling what it could lead to. So, um, once again, the different rides, this area that you could climb up and dive off of, the fountains on either side, the viewing areas, quite something. This is uh, this is the Ferris wheel with the cars on it, and you can see it says steeplechase. You're looking at the back side of it. This is the steeplechase itself that the horses would go on. I love the fact that there were no belts, no straps, no railings, no safety devices whatsoever. Couldn't get away with that in these days. And here you can see how it was elevated so that you could see it from Surf Avenue. Another view of the central court area. Here's the pool. He claimed it was the largest pool in the world, which it may very well have been. This is the Helter Skelter, or also known as the Dewdrop. Different parks had different names for this ride, but it was very popular, the spiral slide. You'll see another version later on. It was a really extraordinary way of getting to it. Here's these cars that you would take to the top for the viewing tower. There were quite a number of them in Coney Island. Here's another tower where you could view what was going on. I believe this was created. I don't believe the airships ever went that high. You'll see a different version of it where there's cables coming down and they swing and they come out. Here's the steeplechase in the background. Here's the pier where the steamer would bring everyone, and he owned them because you would come into this area that was fenced in. So remember, this was pre-Disney. Clever. Oh, by the way, here's the airships with the cables, and they would fly out, but I don't believe they'd ever go as high as the previous card. This was fun. This is the hoopla. The hoopla, everyone would sit on this ring, and these four guys in the middle would push you in a circle, and then they'd push you also way up and way down. So you'd swing side to side, you'd rotate round and round. I'm assuming the whole point was that you grab onto your date for dear life. And it was a great way of getting people to interact. And in those days, it wasn't exactly socially acceptable, so it was a great way to do it. Here's your cart. Noah's Ark. I believe there were 3 of them built. There's one left in Ohio, which you can still visit. And the entire building, this ark, would rock back and forth, and then you could walk in through the whale's mouth and see everything. It's quite an extraordinary feat of architecture, if you ask me. Of course, each of the parks had a Japanese garden, a tea garden. In the 20s, the Japania became very popular, and they were in each of the parks. Here's the parachute jump. Parachute jump still exists, not as a ride, but as a historic landmark, and they've taken the outside of it and filled it with LED lights. It's quite a spectacle. It's worth seeing if you guys ever have a chance. But in the early days, of course, the parachutes would come up and then float down. What's intriguing about it is I always thought it was an amusement device, but it was actually for military training. It went to the World's Fair. The Tillieu brothers bought it and moved it to Coney Island and made it into a ride. Look also at how popular Coney Island was in those days. There's some wonderful shots of just how populous it was. Luna Park, the heart of Coney Island. So here's Luna Park. Luna Park was inland. It was not beachside. It was on the north side of Surf Avenue. And it was Thompson and Dundee. Thompson and Dundee were promoters. They had Luna Park. They had theaters in New York. They had the Hippodrome. Anything large scale, they produced, they owned, and this was quite extraordinary. So, by the way, you'll notice the entrance from Surf Avenue, and then it's flanked by these different activities and things that you could visit, which was not actually part of Luna Park. So here it is. By the way, someone actually from Italy recreated this entrance. It exists now in Coney Island. And there is a Luna Park now in Coney Island having nothing to do with the original, but they took the concept, the name, etc., and recreated it. But you can see the street, quite something. Here it is at night. Had Gesundheit. They had
sorry.
rides, shows, etc. Here's the court where we're inside. We're now inside Luna Park. You can see how popular it was, and the various rides, the various activities, the various shows, the food, what have you, all within the confines of Luna Park. Luna Park, by the way, this is the trip to the moon, which would have been a virtual trip, of course, but based on Milieu's film that came out. So these would often get updated according to what was most prevalent. But look at the architecture; it's extraordinary, and they're just borrowing from every age of architecture. And here's kind of an Oriental theme, Beaux-Arts. It's all getting combined to create an extraordinary visual show. Look at the scale of these sculptures. These sculptures were often created with wire mesh and paper mache and what have you, and then made weatherproof. Here's a slide. The slides were all very popular. This is another view of the same building, and you can also see just barely this what they call the scenic railway. Which was the forerunner of the roller coaster. The trains would go up and down, and they would see all the scenery in here, which you can't see, but it's apparently quite a show. These are the towers that at night were all lit up. These are all lights. You're going to see a picture of that in a moment, but they were really terrifically done. Another view of the towers. And here it is at night. So remember, known as the City of Lights, this was extraordinary. Remember, this was in the early days of electricity, so there was no other opportunity to see anything like this anywhere. This was it. Here's a lagoon at night, and the chutes the boats would land in the lagoon. The folks could be on the sides viewing all the activities. Everything was lit up. Illuminated nightly by electricity. Another view of Luna Park. This is, I think, terrific. Right here you can see the slide coming down, but this is the scaler, the earliest version of an escalator, which would bring the folks to the top of the slide. You could, of course, walk up, and then you would slide down, which was quite an activity. So here's the scaler on the right going up. Here's the stairs, and then on the all the way over here, you can see the slide coming down. Here's the chutes in the background. Here's the lagoon. It gives you a sense. Look at all the sculptural pieces that adorned all of the buildings. Here you go. Here's the slide coming down. These are actually viewing booths. There's a Fatty Arbuckle film from the 1920s. Showing them inhabiting one of these areas. And there were little penny arcade games here that they could play, as well as just viewing the crowds. By the way, here it's called the Helter Skelter, this slide. So here's the viewing booths, restaurant, what have you, everything just over the top. Wonderfully over the top. Teaser, which is yet another ride here, where you'd spin around while spinning in a circle. Here's the Red Mill, Moulin Rouge, and in front of it is the steam train built by the Cagney brothers. Each park had their own little miniature steam train to get around, to see everything, and to stop at the different rides and activities. This is wonderful. These guys get carted up to the top, and then they go rolling down here. And as they roll down, they would spin either right or left, the tickler. Another view. the miniature railroad and the tickler. Virginia reel would go up and down, and you'd spin around to boot. And a lot of these areas were considered scenic rides. Here's another scenic ride where you'd Rye Playland has one left, and there's also one in Iowa at the Iowa State Fair, where it was called the Old Mill, and you'd take this boat and you'd go through all these different areas and see all these different animated activities. Here's the Shoot the Chutes. So you can see the boat starts at the top. This little wooden platform tilts. The boat goes down the chutes, the water, and ends up in the lagoon. And there's a fellow in the back who steers it once it hits the lagoon to steer it to either side. And there are videos of this on YouTube. It's quite something to see. Different rides. This is all Luna Park still. Did I go the wrong way? Yes, I did. This is called the Witching Waves. A lot of the rides were in the forefront of invention and technology. Scientific American in 1911 devoted issues to a lot of the amusement rides in Coney Island. This was invented by George Mangles. And these are steel plates that are hinged, and there are rollers underneath creating waves. And then these little wicker carts would be pushed along. Most of the time, the carts crashed into the walls. It was not successful, so it was taken down, but it was still considered extraordinary in its day. And this, amongst other rides, were featured in Scientific American. Here's the, once again, Japanese gardens, which every park had. The ballrooms were very popular, very important. You can see the bandstand on the end. Remember, they were illuminated by electric lights, and there were viewing stands both above and below on either side. Here's the circus. Every park had its own amusement. You're going to see more about that in a bit. But of course, live animals, you know, clowns, jugglers, magicians, etc. Here it is at night. You can see it's open air. You could see the boardwalk via elephant, which must have been something. Here's Dreamland. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, each of the parks had their own music. So this is I'll Meet You Tonight in Dreamland. And I'll Meet You Tonight in Dreamland was not in your dreams. It was literally Dreamland, the amusement park. But there were waltzes and music written for each of the parks. And the whole point is, if you'd hear the music, you'd think, I have to go to Coney Island. So here's Dreamland, and you can just barely make it out. It says Dreamland right there. Also an extraordinarily large park. Here it is. And the scale is spectacular. This is called Creation. And in here, you would see a biblical recreation of creation. Remember, this is not the boardwalk. This is inside Dreamland. So all of these activities went back to the Dreamland proprietors. Here's another view of it. Now you'll see that architecturally, each of the parks mimicked each other, even though it was sort of a fanciful architectural approach and extraordinary, particularly at night. They did borrow liberally from each other. Here's the lagoon for the Shoot the Chutes. Here's the Shoot the Chutes going down into the lagoon, the Japanese tea house, the viewing tower. This great tower was illuminated at night to boot. Here it is at night. So you have to remember how special electricity was. This electricity house, you see this person, he was collecting admission. You could go inside the house and see them generating electricity. That's how unique and special it was. And electricity, remember, in those days, there was a war between Edison and Tesla, between AC and DC. And you will see coming up that Edison was rather proud of having electrified certain areas of Coney Island. Here you are shooting the chutes, coming down the chutes. Here you are, here's the chutes coming down the lagoon, and this is where you would unload or load. Here, the Cagney brothers built many locomotives, steam locomotives for all kinds of amusement parks. If you're curious and would like to ride one of these, the Strasburg Railroad in Pennsylvania still has a Cagney engine running on the track, and you can experience this in real life. Bostock came out of England. He was an animal trainer, very famous, very popular, and he would have animals exhibited. Remember, this was before the zoos were really popular, and these weren't just animals on display. These were animal acts. So the animals would actually do shows. So here you have it, the Bostock animal. In one of my other lectures, you will see items carved for Bostock out of England. Quite extraordinary, incredibly elaborate. Here's Bostock's animal arena. This is the sacred tattooed bull. Nonetheless, there were all kinds of everything from cows to penguins to elephants, anything, you name it. I'm not clear how many of you remember seeing live shows with fires and what they would do. This building was actually built out of asbestos, so it's fireproof, but they would have flames shooting out of the windows via gas, and then they would pump out the fires. A lot of these people were actual real volunteer firemen who would put on these exhibitions because fire safety was a big deal in those days. In fact, a lot of buildings were lost to fire. So this was quite an exhibition. When I was a kid, I got to go up to one of the pumpers and pump by hand the hose and put out the fire, which was a real thrill. I just love the fact that some of the buildings look like ships. Some of them look like you saw the Ark earlier. So they really did all kinds of different wonderful architectural things. This was a theater where you could see live entertainment. Also, for those of you postcard collectors, these obviously were all hand colored, but you can see they were imitating a very colorful experience. So here's the circus outdoors. I love the fact that the boats are going through the buildings here. This is a theater where they would have magic acts that you could come and watch live, obviously, and they would, advertise acts from around the world. Here's the sideshows. There were many sideshows in Coney Island, and you can see that it would include a strongman, a sword swallower, a fat lady, a rubber man, all the different, it was called a 10-in-1 show. There were 10 acts for one dime, and it was run continuously. There is still a 10-in-1 show in Coney Island to this day, and you can come in whenever you like, stay as long as you like, and then that's how it worked. The Tom Thumb Midget City Dreamland was, I think, rather amazing. Tom Thumb, of course, was made famous by Barnum, and he traveled the world, literally the world, via being a General Tom Thumb, and which he wasn't, but that's how he was advertised. So they created an entire city in Coney Island, and for midgets. Remember, in those days, they didn't have drugs that midgets could take to grow to a normal size. So there was quite a number of midgets. They had their own fire department, their own police department, their own housing. And this was an exhibit that you could pay money and see. That, of course, the money that you paid went to financing the fire department, the police, and the entire city. So this is the midget city in Coney Island. So people would come and just look at all the midgets. That was a show. This is General Tom Thumb himself and his wife, Lydia. And the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport has some of these original coaches and his clothing and what have you, so you can see pieces from this entire exhibit. Once again, Japanese tea house, Dreamland Cafe. This is, I think, an incredible photo. This is the ballroom, but look at the number of electric bulbs in the ceiling. It is nothing short of overwhelming. Remember, that was a big deal in those days, so they just went over the top with all the bulbs and everything. So here's a bathing area. This is a pier where the boats would come and drop people off. And here is something which is quite extraordinary. The train would go out and come back, but do you notice how the track goes up and over each of the trains? There's a wonderful video of this. This is a railroad car with track running over it, so the train could run in both directions on a single track, and one would go right over the other. And here's Dreamland, the baths, the salt baths indoors, etc. Dreamland Fire. So opening day, 1911, Dreamland burned to the ground. And the promoter was rather clever. He would, for 10 cents, you could go to the grounds and view everything. And the idea was to collect the money and rebuild Dreamland. Dreamland was never rebuilt in that it was too expensive to do it. Rides and attractions. This, by the way, is Fatty Arbuckle. And Thompson Scenic Railway. Scenic Railway, remember, was a railway that was not flat. It would go up and down. It was the forerunner of the roller coaster. Okay. And here you go. Here you have it. It would go out into the water, come around, and come back. Here's another Scenic Railway. Remember, it wasn't just a roller coaster in those days, but you would go back past different scenes throughout this edifice. So in this case, you were touring the Alps. These are different rides that Mangels designed. The Whip. There are still a number of whips, one of them at Rye Playland, but around the country you can still see them, both full-size adult whips and kiddie whips. This doesn't exist anymore, but these both were in Scientific American. So this one is called the Whip. It would spin around and also oscillate. You people may remember these. You would go flying around. I thought they weren't a lot of fun. Here's Surf Avenue, prior to it being paved, but it's a wonderful picture. Observation Tower, early version of the roller coaster, etc. Loop the Loop was the earliest version of Looping the Loop, was circular, and it turns out it wants to be more or less egg-shaped because the G's are too high at the top here, and people would break various bones because of the amount of G's. Here's the Cyclone. The Cyclone is still there. It is landmarked, thankfully, and it's sort of a combination of wood and steel. This is the side street where they'd fill them up with rides outside the Cyclone. They don't do that any longer, but there's some wonderful videos of that. The Wonder Wheel still exists from the early 20s. Worth seeing. At the base of the Wonder Wheel, you'll see a piece that I did, and also there's the Coney Island History Museum at the base of the Wonder Wheel, also worth visiting. Merry-go-rounds. There were quite a number of merry-go-rounds that were carved in Coney Island in what they call the Coney Island style, which was very flamboyant because each of them competed with the other, and they wanted each one to be more flamboyant than the next to attract ridership. Here's yet another Scenic Railway. You can see it. Here it is. L.A. Thompson is Thompson and Dundee, and here the ride would go around this mountain that they created. I love the fact that you have the electric scenic railway, but notice it says Edison Company Electric Light and Power, that Edison was very proud to have electrified certain portions of Coney Island and was not shy about advertising that fact. I think this is wonderful. I'm assuming this is the same Schlitz as the Schlitz beer. And they had a beer garden and these boats, and I'm assuming the boat would go around the lagoon and you drink beer. So there you have it. Another wonderful version of the dance hall and skating rink. A lot of these areas would be, let's say, skating rink during the day and then dance hall at night. Here's the band pavilion. The viewing stands on either side, both above and below, and you can get food up here. All of the famous activities, the Galveston flood, the Johnstown flood, they all had recreations. You have to understand that a lot of these buildings would hydraulically flip over and get destroyed. When the water came in, they'd pump the water in, and then the audience would leave, they'd pump the water out, the buildings would go back upright, and they'd show the devastation from the flood. Entertainment and exhibitions. So you have to understand that people from around the world were an exhibition that people would pay to see. These are, in fact, notable quaint people, Eskimos, you know. And here's rides for kids. Here's the Johnstown flood. So remember, a lot of these, oh, this is a wonderful postcard. This is the Steel Globe Tower. The Steel Globe Tower was the largest self-contained amusement park ever built. Or you can see all the subway trains coming to the Steel Park Tower, all these rides, activities, games, restaurants, etc. This was entirely fictitious. Someone had the artwork created and went around selling shares to become part owners of this to fund its construction. It never happened. It was a hoax. Once again, the circus, Steeplechase Park. Here's Al Flosso, the Coney Island faker, spelled fakir, which is the Indian word for Indian from India, for magician. But Al was known as the Coney Island faker, and he did magic and Punch and Junie and the teens. Here's Al, and you can see this is in front of one of the sideshows. This is interesting. This is Gene Eugene, half man, half woman. So that was a big deal. They would turn either right or left, and you'd see one or the other. But obviously, the tallest person on the planet, the fat lady, the sword swallower, all of the sideshow acts, the musical acts, the clowns, the whip crackers, they all existed. And this, by the way, is Huber's, not to be confused with Hubert's Museum in Times Square, which had also entertainment. And here's Al doing Punch and Judy. And Little Egypt. The original Hoochie Coochie dancer was featured in the 1893 Columbian exhibition, moved to Coney Island. And the interesting thing about Little Egypt, she was so popular that there were quite a number of imitators. As such, there was a famous lawsuit where Little Egypt sued Little Egypt because Little Egypt claimed she was the original Little Egypt. And this went on because there was quite a number of folks who claimed to be the original Little Egypt. This is interesting. What happened was, as time went on, the idea of seeing sideshow people and freaks and what have you became very unpopular. So what they did was they started saying, this is what will happen to your children if you do drugs. Come see, you know, the mysteries, the wonders. And it was the idea of kind of preventing drug abuse, which was sort of intriguing, if you ask me. You'll notice there were penny arcades and, you know, booths along the street where you could play games, shooting arcades, you name it. Minstrel shows. Minstrel shows featured, in theory, black people. A lot of these folks weren't black, but they were performing in blackface, which of course became illegal, and was not exactly politically correct. Um, Oriental Village, you'll notice just about none of them are Oriental, but that's how they promoted it. Feltman's, the home of the famous Coney Island Red Hot or Hot Dog, had an outdoor garden where you could dine. Once again, Jimmy Durante played here. They also had their own carousel. So it was not only a great food place, but an amusement place in its own right. Henderson's was both dining and live entertainment, music, shows, etc. So these are the various pavilions that you would see with food um, along Coney Island. So this is the famous baby hatchery. So the baby hatchery lived in Luna Park from 1903 to 1939 in Dreamland. It was also at the Chicago World's Fair, the New York World's Fair, etc. Dr. Coney was considered a nutcase. He was a real doctor, and he thought that neonatal care would help babies along, and they could become healthy adult human beings. Patrons paid the fee to see this, but it was free for the parents of the incubator babies. And what that implied was that any class of person, upper, middle, lower, etc., could have this free care. So this was considered, quite extraordinary in its day. They would have an outside talker, also known as a barker. So Cary Grant was outside the baby hatchery and would hawk tickets, and people would buy the tickets and come in and see the baby incubators. You have to remember, this is prior to any neonatal care in any hospital anywhere. So here's the baby incubators. Life begins at the baby incubator. And here's the inside. You can see each of these is an incubator. You can see they have their own air forced in. It's fresh air and it's warm. They're glassed in, so that keeps germs away from the babies. And each baby has an attendant, a nurse, or a doctor to oversee their progress. In effect, preemies, tiniest babies of all world. Babies are accepted as no charge, regardless of class and color. Coney's own daughter, Hildegard, spent 3 months there. 1939 New Yorker article, I love this, said that male graduates became doctors themselves, and prematurely born girls seemed to get married as frequently as any other kind. It was closed in 1941 when Cornell opened their preemie hospital ward. But here's a baby inside the incubator, and you can see it was a sterile environment. It was heated, etc. So he was ahead of his time in all actuality. There's Dr. Coney, the father of the baby incubator, holding a baby. So, but he was considered a kook in his day. Here's Dino's Wonder Wheel Park, which you saw a postcard of earlier. This was the grandma's predictions. You can see the high water mark here. This was after Sandy. Before the restoration, she looked pretty dreadful. And then we built a new cabinet for her, restored her, my wife and I, and my friend Gary. And she's now living a happy life. When she came back, she made it there in time for Mother's Day, and there was a book people could sign welcoming her back. Here's Laughing Sal. After the restoration, you could drop it a nickel and give her a tickle. Here's a replica of a 1907 Wurlitzer 165 band organ that I carved. This is an old slide you're about to see, but anyway, History Day, look it up online. You didn't see it last year, and you may not see it this year because of COVID, but there's the Coney Island History Museum, which if you guys look up, is really worth a visit because they rotate the exhibits, and there's lots of fun things to see on the history of Coney Island. Now we open it up for everyone. Any questions?
I got a comment,
Yeah,
a question.
go ahead.
My grandmother's brother, Frank Buell, he was the press agent for Luna Park in the summer of 1916 and 1917. And in 1918 summer, he was the assistant manager of Luna Park.
That's very cool. Do you have any literature or information or anything from that time?
Yeah, I do.
Wow, love to see it.
Okay.
Was that you, Dick? I couldn't tell who was speaking.
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, that's cool.
So how did you get to Greece then? What brought you up to Greece?
Oh, no, the rest of the family never went to New York City, just him.
Oh, wow.
He used to, rest of the year, he would travel around with like Broadway shows that would travel from city to city. He was like the manager of the show.
In some of your later cards, you had cars. You talked about all the automobiles that were there. When did they build the bridges? Because before you could only get there by steamship.
Yeah, actually quite early on. I have another lecture that shows a little more of the surrounding areas and what was going on in those days. But you have to remember that the steamships were like the 1840s, 1860s. They were quite big. By the 1860s to 80s, a lot of the subways were being built and extended to Coney Island, and then by around 1900, you had certainly roads and trolleys and complete access.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Two things. That smiley face, tell you smiley face, he sort of looks like Alfred E. Newman's father.
Yeah, I believe that was the inspiration for Alfred E. Newman. No question about it.
Wouldn't be surprised.
But also, if you look at some of the historical images from not only Coney Island but other like there's a lot of amusement devices and what have you, and they all borrow very liberally that face.
Asbury Park, yeah,
Asbury Park for sure. If you get any, Asbury Park, of course, still exists, and they have a gift shop. You can go online and buy things. It is the very same face. And the other thing that was interesting about Tillieu is the face was painted in quite a number of different locations throughout the park. And if you look at it, it's not the same each time. That his hair would be a little different, his teeth would be a little different. So it wasn't actually a logo as such. It was an image that just said it's the funny place, in effect.
How did Coney Island? Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about Seagate, the private community at the other end?
About which I don't know anything about.
Okay.
I mean, I think it came much later though than, well, not much later, but I think I can hypothesize that the whole point of it was that Coney Island. I don't mean the entire island. I mean Coney Island in quotes. The middle part that was rough was noted for a lot of things that were you wouldn't be too proud of actually. So I think the idea of creating a gated community was in effect to create a safe environment that was away from the amusement area.
Okay, thank you.
And there was enormous pressure to shrink the amusement area also, which of course they did do. It went from, if I'm not mistaken, like over 40 acres to less than 7 right now. So they just kept pushing in and changing it from amusement to housing. So they were sort of at odds, if you will, most of the time.
How do those buildings fare during the winter months? Because they're so ornate. I know you said they were winterized. The paper mache was waterproof.
I'll tell you a wonderful example of that, which absolutely floored me. In San Francisco, and I cannot remember, a postcard collector would know when the famous exhibition was. It was before the earthquake. Nonetheless, they had this exhibition And you remember, these World's Fairs were temporary. And as such, they'd build all these buildings, create all these fantastic environments, tear them down and move to the next city. One of the buildings they built in San Francisco was paper mache with wire lath. And what made that intriguing to me was during the great earthquake, all of the brick and stone buildings crumbled to the ground, and the paper mache one, rattled and shook and remained standing. And I believe it's still there to this day. So it's counterintuitive to think that something so temporary is so permanent. And I believe because it breathed, that the weight of the snow and whatever didn't affect it, because it allowed it to flex. And as such, as long as you maintained it and painted it and kept water from rotting it, it would be extraordinarily sound. So I think that's kind of intriguing that a lot of the temporary structures were are around to this day. So it gives you, I think, pause to think about how they're now redesigning buildings to make them earthquake proof. And what makes them earthquake proof is that they're in fact flexible rather than rigid. So I thought, just as a side note, it was interesting. I got a hard hat tour of the World Trade Center during a remodeling at one point, and the floors were not attached to the walls. They were sitting on plates. There was about a foot gap between the exterior structure and the floor, and it blew my mind. I was thinking, how unsafe. And they said, well, it's very simple. The building sways about 7 feet right to left in the wind, and the floors have to slide on these plates. So the idea of making it flexible was part of its, ingenious design. So I think a lot of these older buildings that were wood and paper mache and what have you were actually very cleverly designed and meant to withstand, all kinds of things. Like the Elephant Hotel, I don't know how long it was meant to last, but it's still there to this day in New Jersey.
Lucy, I grew up outside of Atlantic City in Margate, and that's where Lucy the elephant resided. She was
resides.
I was there until 1973, and she was in really bad shape, but the kids put their pennies together and they actually moved her down the street to where she is now. But I was not aware that, the other ones were much larger. Because she was sizable, but you weren't going to get 31 rooms in that little thing.
Yeah, no, of the two, the one in Coney Island was much bigger.
Didn't realize that.
Did you ever go inside, Lucy?
You can do that now. It's been redone or whatever. When I was there, you could go up and walk around it, but it was it was amazing they were able to repair it because it was so far gone.
Yeah.
It's,
Well,
it's actually an Airbnb now. You can actually stay inside it for the weekend.
Yeah. It's gone through a number of changes.
Yep.
Great.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
It's
Do you
Joe.
know-
How you doing?
Yeah, Joe.
When I don't know how to get on the screen, but when I was a kid, there were 3 pools in Coney Island. There was Steeplechase, there was Washington Baths, and there was Ravenhall. And I had a season locker at Ravenhall, and it was the largest pool in Coney Island, and it was a saltwater pool. And believe it or not, it had no filtration system. And every third day in the evening, they would drain the entire pool. It was a pipe that went out into the ocean. They would drain the entire pool, and then they would refill it for the next day.
Wow. That's extraordinary.
Hey, Bob.
Would they refill it with like seawater?
Yeah, filled with seawater. They pumped it in and out. There was a big
Wow.
pipe that went under the sand, went under the boardwalk, under the sand, and out into the ocean.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
I picked up some neat motorcycle and early auto racing postcards lately. One or two of them were from Coney Island from a board track. Are you familiar with that, racing on a board track?
No. Was it, were they, well, tell me, first of all, you tell me what you have, and I'll tell you what I know.
Well, it said board track racing Coney Island. It was very steep inclined wooden track with very early motorcycles and cars racing around it.
Okay, so what it was is a wooden bowl. You may or may not have seen people do this, but they start at the bottom, and as they gain speed, they go up the side of the bowl, and then eventually they're absolutely horizontal, going around the circle, and then they would slap people's hands from the audience leaning over. They would grab a cigar, do what have you. There's an example of that at the Motorcycle Museum in New York, just the other side of the Tappan Zee Bridge. He bought one of the old motordromes and reassembled it inside this building. And I'm honestly not sure if they actually do demonstrate it or not, but it is there. So it's quite.
Yeah, I think that what they call it, the Circle of Doom or this and that, they call it things. This is a much bigger track, almost like a racetrack, and it's called the Motor Dome at Brighton Beach. Is that a different place or?
Oh yeah, I'm sure there were quite a number of them because I've seen different versions. There's also, if you go on YouTube, you can see films of them. Okay. And they're pretty nifty. And now what the incantation or the version, whatever, is that it's the globe of death. Have you seen those?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So it's the same thing as the bowl, but they just made it an entire sphere, and then people run past each other. So it's yeah, it's wild. There's also, by the way, some wonderful sideshow banners of the motorcycle. Whatever they went by various names, different names, over time.
Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else?
One of the viewers said that.
Sorry, wait a minute.
Said that your presentation was better than anything Ken Burns had ever done, and I agree. And I think that's because this is such a passion of yours, and it's second nature, and it's probably when you're the happiest when you're doing something like this. Is that true?
Yeah, I have to say, I love a lot of what Ken Burns has done, but I can't believe I'm saying this in real life. Nonetheless, he had a lot of big misses. The one thing that I can't understand is how you can do a history of jazz and not even mention Fats Waller. And same with Coney Island. If you don't know the inner workings of Coney Island and what made it great. And I grew up and I saw and met a lot of the folks who worked there. And they were very colorful and they were very wonderful. And it really gave me this incredible passion for the whole history of Coney Island, not just, architecturally and rides and games and what have you, but the people that made it great. I'll tell you an interesting story. I don't know, you can maybe by show of hands. How many of you saw the film Freaks? It came out in the 30s.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a cult classic. Nonetheless, the hunchback in that movie, it was about all the sideshow performers, some of whom you saw in the presentation tonight. So, on Saturdays, I'd go down to this magic store in Manhattan, and they'd have the seats in a semicircle, and people would come in and sit down and just tell stories, all the old vaudevillians who are still around and what have you. And the hunchback from the movie, The Freaks, came in and he sat down next to me, and he's, chatting up a storm, and he says, "Kid, whatever you do, never talk religion or politics with anyone. And whatever they say they make, divide in half." And then he left. And I looked at them and I said, "Was he kidding?" And they looked at me and said, "Good advice." So, you see a side that you can't see in books. You can't get from research. So, yeah.
Bob,
yeah.
You didn't mention that you actually knew Al Flasso, the Coney Island faker.
Yeah, that he, I think, inspired me to become a magician. I saw him as a kid and just thought it was fabulous what he did. but the old performers would probably do 7 to 10 shows a day, and they honed their act down to a science. It was fabulous. So you saw versions of sleight of hand that you probably will never see again. So that was fun.
Bob?
Yeah.
What got you interested in Coney Island? I'm a bit of a Coney Island collector myself. In fact, I was a source for Rick Burns' documentary.
Yeah.
On Coney Island. So I'm curious how you got into it.
I got into it through magic. That the folks who I met and knew had worked Coney Island when they were much younger, in its heyday, and so as such, I had kind of access to photographs and historical pieces and props and memorabilia and what have you that all came from Coney Island, and I just was blown away by the ornateness and the culture and all of it, and it just became a lifelong passion, So a lot of for those of you who've seen my carvings, a lot of my carvings replicate what happened probably around 1900 to 1910 in Coney Island. So that for me was the heyday. I mean, I know that now there's a lot of wonderful things going on, and they are sort of giving a nod to the past, but a lot of that has really been lost forever. I do have another lecture, which at some point maybe some of you can see, on the Coney Island carvers, most of whom came from overseas and landed in Coney Island and created the Coney Island style. So it gives you a lot more of a view into the culture, the history, what was going on there in the early part of the 1900s. So it's really fascinating, and it really shows you how it colored a lot of what we see now architecturally and in every other sense. So yeah, I'm well steeped into this whole genre, if you want to call it that. And just love it, just fascinated by it.
Where was the merry-go-round factory? Where was the merry-go-round factory located in Coney Island?
So here's the scoop. I'm getting into my next lecture, which you guys are going to have to stay tuned for. But there was not a factory, but a number of factories, all of them competing with each other, which is why the Coney Island style is so extraordinary and so flamboyant. Unlike anywhere else in the country, you would see flaming mains that were gold leaf, that were standing up rather than sitting down. That the different carvers came from different parts of the world, and they brought with them stylistic details that really lit up these pieces. So Jeff, and I think maybe what I might do is do a presentation at one of the rallies and show you guys just how amazing what they did is or was. A lot of it still exists, so to me it's an is. But the beauty is that they were all competing with each other, and as such, it became more and more flamboyant and more extraordinary. Not just the detail, but the different elements. So, for example, I'll give you a little treat. Borelli took some of the horses and put hundreds or possibly thousands of holes in them, and glued jewels, multifaceted jewels, in each of these holes. Examples of this exist at the Carousel Museum in Bristol, Connecticut. What he also did, remember, Coney Island was the city of lights, and electricity was a big deal. He would put a light bulb inside the horses. The horses were hollow, of course, because they had to be, otherwise they would crack and they'd be too heavy. So they had to breathe. But imagine at night, these horses going around with all these jewels lit up, going up and down. I mean, it would just be a showstopper. So a lot of those details are more or less lost to history, but there are examples that you can still find. So the idea was to create something more flamboyant than had ever been seen, to drive ridership and obviously to collect money at the end of the day. So that's how it worked. So,
Coney Island like today?
pardon?
What's
Well,
Coney
yeah,
Island like today?
very much like today. Today, it's all being done with LED, and I have to say, there's extraordinary examples of it, where they'll light an entire Ferris wheel with a light show on the side of it, you know, the size of which that's just incomprehensible. And with computers, you can do light shows that are just extraordinary. They'll just knock your socks off. So this was a version of that 120 years ago. That just, you know, defies logic in many ways. Yeah. So you know, yeah, it's an earlier version of the same thing. It's a way of attracting attention to grab revenue. You know. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm curious about the, you know, Coney Island, the experience of going there from the perspective of like a visitor or, you know, someone just going for fun, versus like the people who worked there and the tight-knit community that must have been there, and the drama and the, you know, competition. You touched a little bit about how, you know, they were kind of liberally borrowing from each other's ideas, and I'm sure the world of patents and copywriting was, you know, a hot topic there too. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about, you know, what that insular community was like, you know, how they all kind of got along or didn't.
Yeah, you know, I think you're touching upon an interesting topic. You know, like, so for example, in magic, I think there was a lot of secretism, and that you had to kind of prove yourself before they would share secrets. But I also believe in craftsmanship. It was a very different thing. Now you can go on, you know, YouTube and find a video and learn whatever you want. In those days, you apprenticed, and you became an apprentice, and then ultimately a journeyman, and then ultimately a master. But the system of whether it was sign painting or painting horses or carving horses or building rides, I think it was more of an apprenticeship situation than it was, hey, I'm going to go to school and become a you know, a Coney Island person. A lot of them did it through, they were born into it. Some of them would be there just more or less all the time and become a part of the culture and learn different things. So I think it's a different society. The other thing that I will tell you is I'm positive there was a lot of, if you will, competition ethnically from, you know, Jewish, Italian, perhaps Chinese, what have you, and they all had different skill sets, and they'd be all, you know, working either with or against each other, create something more extraordinary. There was also, I think, a fascination with different cultures, hence the Japanese tea houses and the various other things. So they all existed side by side, you know, and I think it's amazing that a lot of it evolves the way it did. I touch on that an awful lot in one of the other presentations in terms of, you know, the carving and what have you. So, so what, neat, Sienna, what was that? Somebody just posted something. Well, anyway, so yeah, so that's my take on it. I think it's, you know, like a lot of the painters apprenticed as kids and they grew up into it, you know. I can certainly reference quite a number of examples, you know, in that regard. So yeah, it was fascinating environment. The other thing that makes it incredibly politically incorrect is that a lot of the sideshow performers couldn't get work anywhere else because they were considered freaks, and this was the only place they could get gainful employment. And even as though it nowadays feels very unpolitically correct, in those days it was a living. So Tom Thumb wrote that he thanked Barnum. He would have been a midget and an outcast, but instead he was a worldwide star. And there's a great story. Barnum was quite the entrepreneur, and before he started circuses, he had museums. The American Museum was his. of which there were a number of versions based on the fact that it burned down 2 or 3 times. Nonetheless, Barnum went out of business and went bankrupt a number of times. And later in life, when he was, more or less on Skid Row, General Tom Thumb came to his rescue financially and got him started again. So that's how thankful a lot of the sideshow performers were to the promoters. So it was a very tight-knit community and very unlike what I think you would see today in terms of employer-employee relationships. It was a society more than just a way of making a living, So, anyone else?
When it comes to either the people that were employed there or whether it was the people that were visitors or whatever, did most people come for the day, or did most people live like in Brooklyn, or come from all over?
I would say the majority of folks visiting Coney Island were tourists. Needless to say, there's quite a number of people in Brooklyn, all of whom visited Coney Island, and many of them regularly. But when you see the Ouija photographs of the beach, when you can't even see a spot the size of a dime, you know that those crowds were not local Brooklyn. They were from everywhere, from Manhattan, from everywhere else. And Coney Island was like going to Europe nowadays. In those days, prior to flight being as readily available as it is, you would take a trip and you'd go to Coney Island, and it was the destination, the entertainment destination. Remember, this was all pre-Disney and pre-everything else.
Bob?
Yes.
It's Bob Stonehill from the Taconic Postcard Club.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
I came on a bit late, so you may have covered it. I just wondered, how long linear mile-wise was it from one end to the other? And did you consider all of Brighton Beach as part of Coney Island?
Yeah, so one of the earlier slides that I think you missed basically divided Coney Island into 3 sections: the eastern section, which included Brighton and Manhattan Beach; the middle section, which was primarily the amusement area; and of course the western part, which somebody referenced in terms of Seagate. So it's the middle part that we were really focusing on, although I did talk about the luxury hotels on the eastern part.
The Oriental, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I enjoyed the program, even though I was watching it from a restaurant with couldn't get the audio, but unfortunately. But I saw much of it when I got in the car.
Oh, great.
So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
At what age what years were children welcome there? Initially, you see no children in the photos. At what time did they start coming?
I think one of the things that I found interesting was one of the amusement parks, and I can't remember which one, had something that was, I think, in its day considered extraordinary. They had a place where you could drop off your kids and they would take care of them for the day. I'm not to say that they weren't welcome, but the whole point was that you wanted to get a break, that part of this entertainment experience was leaving your kids behind for whatever reason. And I think slowly over the years, it evolved into more and more family friendly. In fact, some of the parks had, if you will, kiddie parks, where kids could go in. The rides were scaled down, and it was safe, and they could have a wonderful time. I suspect also in those days you could drop your kids off at the kiddie park. They could spend the day. The adults could go stroll around, have their beer, do whatever else, and then come back and pick up the kids at the end of the day. It's not like it is today, where you would never even consider leaving your kid anywhere out of sight for the majority of the day and expect to find them again at the end of the day. So I think, it evolved over time. And like to this day, Rye Playland has Kiddieland and the rest of the park. A lot of amusement parks have a kiddie section, and they were distinct. You know, nowadays I think it's merged, and I think it's more, in effect, family friendly. That things have evolved over time. You know, but it's not like there was a date at which, oh, okay, you know, kids are allowed. But the Tunnel of Love and the salon carousels, and even the inside the Steeplechase Park, where they had these platters that you would get spun on. And even, I don't know how many of you remember, Steeplechase Park had this walkway where women would walk, and there would be a jet of air that would spray up and their skirts would fly up. I mean, that was all adult entertainment. That was not, you know, family friendly for kids. You couldn't do that now for lots of reasons. But even employing midgets and having them look like clowns and you know, using a slapstick on your guests would just not happen. You know? So yeah, so there's a lot of things. Well, also the insurance industry, I think, changed everything spectacularly, where rides had to be redesigned to be safe for kids and adults alike. I mean, you could never get away with a steeplechase park today, riding horses with no barricades, no straps, no padding. Just, you fell off, it was your own problem. You rode at your own risk. I don't think you could get away with that now. You know, so I think, you know, ultimately it evolved over time. Is what I'm guessing. Yeah. Anyone else?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. That was a
My
great
pleasure.
presentation. Really, really liked it.
Thank you all.
How do your other lectures?
Well, I have one on the Coney Island immigrant carvers. Well, Susan and I, you ready, Susan? Are working on one, the history of Rye Playland, which I think should be interesting. All of them amusement related. So I'm not, you know, it's not like you're going to see, you know, the famous bridges of Europe. That's not going to happen. You know? But certainly anything amusement related, you'll be welcome to be a part of. I also wrote a book on acanthus carving, which is another thrill of mine. So I think at some point, if you want to learn about the language of acanthus, I can talk about that to boot. So there's lots of different topics I have presentations about. So if you feel like inviting me back, I'd be happy to do it at any time.
Yeah, we'd love to.
Thank you for the applause. Anyway, I will see all of you soon. I certainly thank everyone for joining and participating in all the wonderful questions and information. You have to understand that I learn an awful lot presenting, so it's really a pleasure to get everyone's input.